we left off with the 21 and the 6th line. All 6 lines, once they are ready to commit themselves, they will move to the next hexagram and they will move to the first line. This ability to recognize what is chaotic and what isn't. It leads to the 51st hexagram, the arousing, and it leads into and remains in the ego. It goes from the heart muscle to the gall. The 51 is the gate of shock, but it is an individual gate. It is a gate of individual shock, mutative shock. It is a gate of the fool or the brave one. It is the capacity of the ego to leap into the void or not. Initiation. The 21 is an ego gate of the mundane plane. It is there to make sure that there is material well-being in the community. Yet the 21 itself and the 6th line will lead it into the mystical path of the 51. The 51-25 being the channel of initiation. The need to be first. It says the ability to respond to disorder and shock through recognition and adaptation. Never forget that this is an ego gate. The first line, the foundation of the arousing, is reference, the advantage of previous crisis experience. The ability to leap into the void is based on the lessons learned, to become prepared through experience. That to be the first doesn't mean you're the first time. And the 51 is always trying to be first. It means that you can be first, but you have to be prepared. You can leap into the void, but you have to be prepared. And that preparation is rooted in the past. Please notice that Pluto is exalted. This does not exist. It is not active in any human being on earth. It cannot be read in the line. It's just not there. It's dormant. What we have in the first line is the Venus in detriment, and the Venus in detriment only. So the foundation of the 51, the foundation of shock, is skewered to one side every 256 years. This is part of the larger genetic program of incarnation. A tendency to emotional withdrawal after a shock, the weakness of the ego in times of challenge. This does not make it easy to build a solid foundation for initiation in this time. It creates problems because of that. And it also means that the previous crisis experience is that because this is a time of weak initiation, that it takes a lot of experience to build up that strength. The second line, to be called to bravery, to be called to foolishness, to be called to the challenge of being first. 51 twos, like 21 twos, don't feel like ego people. You know, they're minding their own business. And you don't really get a sense of the power of their ego until you call them out, and then you get the power of that ego. The second line is called withdrawal, and it's a classic for second lines, because that's what the second line is all about. Leave me alone. I'm doing my thing. Mars exalted, and you'll notice no introduction to this line. The recognition of the mechanics of shock that indicate when withdrawal is the only logical action, the instinctive withdrawal, when the power of the ego is threatened. It is so important for the individual to know the right timing. Initiation is a question of timing. To be able to jump at the right moment, to leap at the right moment. That's why withdrawal is so important. You know, when you look at the way in which 20th century shamanism is marketed, you know, it's this learning the way. Step-by-step learning of the way. To understand the mechanisms of it. And to be able to withdraw in order to recover. And to know when not to act. There's an awful lot of foolishness in the 51. And if you have it dominated by somebody's Mars, you're going to see a lot of foolishness that can be quite dangerous to the person themselves. Because the 51 is liable to try anything, given certain circumstances. Mercury in detriment, being too smart for one's own good and rejecting withdrawal in the vain belief that one can outsmart natural forces. These people are delightful. They often die young. Well, it's true. You know, it's like the charge of the Light Brigade. C'est magnifique, mais c'est pas la guerre. You know, it's beautiful, but it's not war. It can look wonderful. Bravery can look wonderful. It's real dumb, though. Now, if somebody has the 51 too, and they have this detriment, it's not about telling them that they can't do that. It's not. But then again, the moment that you see that it's a second line, you have to understand that what they're being called to, if the call is right, if the caller is right, then yes, they can go racing down that mountain looking very brave. And they can die doing it. But then again, that's okay. That's for them. That's for them. We are not here to save people's... I'm not here to save anybody's life. My life is about non-interference. I'm not in charge. Things are what they are. The 51 too, the detriment is not something to say, oh, you're too smart for your own good, you better not be. No, it's not true. That's what they have to live out. But because of what it is, because of the structure, because it's the second line, you know there's a criteria for that. That's what's so important. That they can't live that out unless it's called out of them. That somebody else has to recognize that they can be too smart for their own good. And that the only way it's going to work is if when that is recognized in them, that the way in which they operate according to that recognition is according to their design and their type and their authority. yes, then they can race into the valley and be martyrs. Yes, it's okay. And they will know that it's okay, because it is truly them. Do not soften lines. The moment you try to soften a line, understand that you're showing your own prejudice, because you think there's something wrong with it. And you don't see that there's nothing wrong with it. It is just another aspect of the whole. And it can be perfect as long as that being is operating out of their nature. Then living out whatever that is correct. The third line. Remember that third line's trial and error? They are inherently weak for that reason. They are designed to be broken. You know, the wave of the third line is bonds made and broken. It's part of that process. And this third line gives its keynote to the name of all third lines. That is, the third line structurally is about adaption. And the 51.3 is about adaption. Understand that the 51 is going to leap into the void. Now the first line will say to itself, what is leaping? What is the void? Is there anything worth leaping at? And may never leap at all in its entire life. The second line will not even know that there's a void to leap into. Someone has to point it out to them. And maybe then they will leap into the void. The third line knows that there's something to leap into, but has no idea what the consequences of that could possibly be. And yet, it's ready to try. Third lines have accidents. If you have the 51.3 and you don't know what you're really leaping into, chances are you're going to have to make adjustments in midair. This is called adaption. The sun exalted. There's a lot of people who are born on crosses where the sun in this position gives them a very powerful capacity to adapt in this life. A life-sustaining awareness that thinks on its feet and thus creates opportunities. The power of spontaneity in times of challenge. This is the beauty of the third line at its best. Leaps into the void. Very foolish. Very foolish. But has a gift in that leaping that it can somehow adapt. And out of that comes knowledge. Out of that comes the landing on the other side. The landing into the 25. You know, once you've left across the void, that pathway then gets marked. You know, it becomes the basis of teaching. It can be done. You can leap across the void. It becomes the priest and the priestess. It becomes the teacher. It becomes all of those forces. That isn't to say that it is not your destiny to leap into the void correctly and die tragically. Remember, this is not about whether leaping into the void is good or bad. It is about that is the genetic imprinting, and that is what's going to take place, one way or another. The detriment, Jupiter. The destabilization that occurs when one's field of normal activity is radically and unpredictably disturbed, where the tendency is withdrawal rather than adaptation. Third lines, while they're shocking everybody else, can get deeply shocked themselves. They can get so shocked that they pull away. If they're not prepared for what is there, they can be so shocked that they do nothing. Often it saves their life. The ego that may be destabilized in times of challenge. It's one of those things to think about as a way of seeing that. You have the 51.3 exalted and you have the 51.3 in detriment. And the 51.3 exalted ends up having to walk across a tightrope in order to save its life. And in the moment that it has to walk across that tightrope, It doesn't matter what's going on, how many people are watching. There is something in it that will just adapt to that situation. The detriment, if anybody is watching, if anybody is putting pressure on that detriment, it may not be able to go across. It may not be able to adapt and leap into that void. It may withdraw. That may either save it or not. In the same way, by the way, that going across may be successful or not. Just because one can adapt to it and try to do it, if you don't have the skills, if you don't have the good fortune, you may not make it anyway. Again, this is not about morality, just the mechanics of it. You can't stop a 51-3 from making mistakes by jumping into the void. You can't. That's its nature. It learns things that way. In these first lines that we've been looking at in the 51, if the personality sun were in these lines, this would be a right angle cross of penetration. And that's made up of the 51st, 57th, 54th, and 53rd hexagrams. The cross of penetration is an indication of the power that is here. That in this ego initiation is the capacity literally to penetrate the void, to break through barriers. And we all know historically that that takes a price. That attempt to break through the barriers does not always prove to be successful, but it is a way. The fourth line is called limitation. Uranus exalted. One of the 6 lines that mentions genius. A pure inventiveness and sometimes genius to find some opportunity even in the midst of the most devastating shocks. The warrior ego that will find some way to answer the challenge. These are people who are fixed on externalizing. And they're fixed on externalizing their competitive capacity. They're fixed on externalizing their ability to leap into the void, and they can be very, very persistent and influential. The missionary, follow me. I will lead you through the darkness. Follow me, and they can be very, very powerful. This is a mystical gate. And the 51-4 calls others. You know, you ever seen these tourist fire shaman things? You know, you got this guy that leads these people across burning coals and walk across, follow me. This is a classic 51-4. Let me take you through the shock plane. And if you follow me, everything will be fine and you will not be burnt. That is the power of that kind of conviction that comes out of that fixed fourth line. Genius in that. The Mercury in detriment, a reasoned make-do mentality that is ineffectual in times of severe shock. Please notice the qualification. In all other cases, it does real great. It's only in severe shock that it runs into difficulty. Remember that built into the fourth line is a real instability. You can see that in the 7-4, this abdicator. You can always see that what appears to be powerful can be taken away from its power. That its lock on being able to lead can suddenly be ripped away from under its feet, so that the fourth line has within it this kind of instability in its nature. So when it comes to severe shock, when it comes to the point, for example, that the leap into the void is life and death, then in this particular case, this detriment, it is not going to operate effectively. Severe shock will bring it towards withdrawal, will pull it away. The end of the fourth line, the sun position at the end of the fourth line, if you have the 51-4, for example, as a personality sun, you would have the 61-1 as your design sun. And this is the juxtaposition cross of shock. And these are people that are fixed on shocking others, fixed on it, constantly externalizing that competitiveness in them. They can be, by the way, superb athletes if that is aligned with a defined sacral center, because it gives them an enormous competitive edge, because they have a deep, deep competitive spirit through this being fixed. It represents the double foundation of what the initiating force actually is. One of the things to keep in mind about the nature of these crosses I mentioned to you, the vast majority of humanity have foundation crosses, that is the major aspect of the line. That there are more right angles than there are left angles, and that by comparison there are very few juxtapositions. So these are very particular forces who have a fixed fate, and their fixed fate is to externalize that essence, to externalize that competitiveness. Everything for them takes on that coloring. And the thing to recognize about them is that they will never, ever, ever break. You cannot break a juxtaposed being. You cannot break them. You can torment them to death. You can try to bend them. You can try to cut them down. You cannot break them. So they will be what they are. They will be fixed in that fate right down the line, and there's nothing that's going to get in the way of that. When you get to the fifth line, you get into the left angle cross, and this is called the left angle cross of the clarion. And the fifth line of the 51, this is the heretic. And in this is the general. This is the projected field. You know, I'm a 51-5 personality son. People project on me that I can initiate them. And because I can, it increases the power of my reputation as somebody that can initiate people. This is what the fifth line is always about. If you had a projection that I could initiate you and I didn't, then you would stone me, because that's the way that it works. So this 51-5, this is a universalizing force to bring about the initiation of the other. It's what fifth lines do. Fifth lines are always calling the other. They are the complete transpersonal line. So here it's called symmetry. And the sun exalted, perfected illumination that in grasping the nature of the shock can transform its normal patterns into a symmetrical adaptation that rides the shock and avoids its devastation. This is the only thing that saved me from the voice. This is where my son is. It's the only thing that kept me alive in my experience. Was this ability simply to be able to adapt to the shock. In the White Book, it's the perfection of the warrior ego through instinctive adaptation. The detriment, the Mars. A tendency in seeking the core to harmonize with one shock only to be overwhelmed by the next. The Book of Letters, the egoism to indulge in victory and lose vigilance. Na 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 na, bang. You know, I survived the shock, isn't it great? Bang. By the way, you can't say to them, look, excuse me, the next time that you have one of those moments of triumph and victory, don't lose vigilance, okay? Because if you lose vigilance, somebody's going to bang you. You know what I mean? You can't tell them that. You can't tell them that. You can't say, look, I want to correct this in you. We're going to do some genetic surgery now. And we're going to eliminate this aspect, and we're going to give you only the exalted. Everything's going to be fine. You know, the point is that they're supposed to be able to live that out. Remember something about the nature of lines. In the end, it doesn't matter whether every line you would have would be a detriment or whatever. It doesn't make any difference. What matters is if you are living out your definition, if you're living out your type, if you are living out your authority, you are living out a correct life. All of those other things will fall into place. One of the things to understand about exalteds and detriments is that they're both tormentors when you're not living out your own nature. Both of them. The whole thing, because you're not living out your own nature. So there's a mechanism here for this line. That is, there is a mechanism that lies underneath in that detriment where you have somebody who always, after a victory, gets carried away and pays a price for it. Now, the whole thing about that is that that's perfectly correct for them as long as they entered into the situation correctly. If they're a manifester, if they asked permission to enter into the challenge in the first place, then no matter how much they got carried away by victory, it's okay for them to get whacked on the head for it. You know, they got an ego problem. It's good for them to have their vanity put in place. I won, smack. And as long as what they're playing is correct, then all of that's okay. It's what's expected of them. And you know what it says to them? It says to them, look, you know, even if you win this, you're going to pay a price. So you better make damn sure that this is what you want to jump into. Because even if you win, you're going to pay a price. And if you lose, you really lose. So you have to be very careful about what you jump into. That's the general sitting in the countryside, saying, oh yeah, sure, you want me to do this, that, and that. But if I mess up, you're going to blame me. If I don't do it fast enough, you're going to bother me. If I don't do it well enough, you're going to accuse me. On and on and on and on and on. So it's a help to get smacked every time you win. Because then you learn that the victory has to be very important and very sweet. Think about it. Don't get carried away with morality. These lines are not moralistic. They really aren't. And the moment that you see that you're reading a line and saying, whoa, heavy stuff, poor thing, I won't say anything. You know, they're supposed to be that, and if they live that out, they get to live out their own nature, and they're correct in all that. Sixth line. The 51-6, because of the importance of the sixth line in the hierarchy of the structure, that the sixth line is there to be able to indicate whether or not that the fifth line heretic is telling you the right thing when they're asking you to leap in the void with them. The 51-6 gets into a lot of trouble when it's young, like all six lines, and it's going to deal with a lot of shock when it's young. And 51-6s are not people that seek out competition. You know, they can be deeply anti-competitive. They've had all that. Trying to be first, you know, trying to get there, you know, leaping into the unknown, falling down over and over again. And they learn all that when they're young, and then they go up and they sit on their hill and they mind their own business. And they don't want to be competitive, and they don't want to jump into something new. Separation. Nothing describes the mystical nature of the sixth line better than separation. It is the keynote in the mystical circuitry for all six lines. It is the perfection. It is the perfection of the sixth line to separate itself. They engage naturally in life when they're young. They learn the lessons. And then it's necessary to separate themselves in order to be able to assess what is there. What is competitiveness? When is it a value? Who is the best guide? All of these questions are being processed by this sixth line. In times of crisis, when all those around are confused and in disorder, the ability not to succumb to the panic, but to have the will and vitality to survive it alone. And there is no detriment, because Pluto's there. It's dormant. in times of crisis, when all those around are confused and in disorder, the ability not to succumb to the panic, but to have the will and vitality to survive it alone. And they're incredible forces. You see, the initiation of the tribe must come through the 51. But the initiator who initiates the tribe can only be sanctioned by the 6. It's when the 6 says yes. And remember, when the 6 says yes, it must then follow itself, which means it goes to the next hexagram and the first line. Here in the Book of Letters, the power of the ego to meet challenges alone, to separate oneself, to go up on the hill, to watch the world, and to be ready to guide the others. 6 lines have a way of attracting people. They have a way of attracting people's questions. They're sought out throughout their life. Very difficult for the 6-line child. The 6-line child looks at its family and realizes immediately what's wrong with its family. Knows right away. And of course, when it's young, it tries to fix that. Say something about it. Do something about it. And of course, it doesn't get the respect it deserves. It gets burnt. And after that, it just watches. It may never have a family itself, unless it can see that having a family is something that can be healthy, that is something that can be fulfilling. The 6th line is always looking for the inherent truth of the hexagram, and recognizing that the hexagram can always mutate, always being on guard, always watching, in order to be able to be clear that what's being presented as the hexagram is legitimate. In other words, what's being universalized through the 5th line is really being legitimate. All 6 lines must maintain their separateness until there is something that they see that they themselves can stand by and live by. And then they must re-enter into the world. And they re-enter into the world. The 51 leads to the 42. They enter into the world to end something, to complete a process. Because the 42 is about completing a process. Nothing can begin until that completion is done.